So thank you everyone for tuning in this afternoon to our event on building your professional network in peace and security. I'm Katie Botto. I'm the co-chair of Forming the Future at Orgs in Solidarity. I'll be moderating today. This event is part of our Orgs in Solidarity Forming the Future working group series on breaking into the field, which we cover various topics related to getting your career started in national security, peace building, policy, etc. And Orgs in Solidarity, for those of you who do not know, is a partnership of more than 300 organizations and individuals who are signatories to the Women of Color Advancing Peace, Security, and Conflict Transformation statements on standing together against racism and discrimination. So our topic today is networking, which we all know is hugely essential to breaking into the field and to advancing your career. I think it's also essential to establishing yourself as a trusted professional once you are in the field. And on a more personal level, it's important to building a healthy and supportive community around yourself to support you throughout your career. But it can also be very intimidating when you're first starting out. So we want to use this time today to sort of demystify what networking is and hopefully help it become less intimidating and a little easier to approach. So before I jump into introducing the speakers, I just want to flag for all of our viewers that we will be taking questions through the Q&A function on the webinar at the last half of the event. So don't put your questions in the chat, put them in the Q&A, and we'll get to them at the end. But feel free to input them anytime, just when you think of them. That'll be fine, and we'll make sure to address them. And now I'll introduce our panelists who have a really broad range of experiences in this field. And I just want to be clear that everyone is speaking in their personal capacity today. So first we have Sahil Shah coming to us from London, where he's a policy fellow at the European Leadership Network. In his role at ELN, Sahil advises senior US, European, and other government stakeholders on reducing strategic and nuclear risks and convenes international security dialogues. Separately, Sahil is also a policy and outreach consultant to the Office of the Executive Secretary at the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization and a policy advisor to the Institute for Security and Technology on its Cataling project. Then we have Simone Williams. Simone is also a very essential member of Orgs in Solidarity. She is the co-chair of Elevating Black and POC Voices in the Media Working Group. Simone is also a program manager for LCWINS. She is leading the development of LCWINS Database 2.0. She previously worked with the project on nuclear issues, PONY, at CSIS, where she managed the team's budget and worked on programming that provided opportunities to help advance young professionals in the nuclear security pipeline. Prior to PONY, she also worked with the Smart Women, Smart Power initiative at CSIS. And then we have Dr. Sumi Terry. Dr. Terry is the director of the Hyundai Motor Korea Foundation Center for Korean History and Public Policy at the Wilson Center. Always a long title, I hope I got that right. Prior to joining the Wilson Center, Dr. Terry served in a range of important policy roles related to both Korea and its surrounding region. She is formerly a senior fellow with the Korea chair at CSIS. We have two CSIS alum with us. And she served as a senior analyst on Korean issues at the CIA. From 2008 to 2009, Dr. Terry was also the director for Korea, Japan, and Oceanic Affairs at the National Security Council. And last, but definitely not least, we have Tristan Guyette. Tristan works at Beyond the Bombs Junior Strategy Partner, and has a passion for exciting and equipping activists. They attended college in Ohio and are based out of Toledo. In the past, they've worked with the Campus Election Engagement Project to educate voters on Ohio's changing registration laws. And currently, Tristan sits on the board of the Nuclear Fusion Project. So thank you all for joining us today. I know it's also a very busy time for obvious reasons in the security field. So thank you all for taking the time to be here. And first, I think it's important for us to establish exactly what networking is and what the outcomes can be. So I want to ask each of you to share with us an instance when networking helped you find a job or opportunity, or when it made a difference in your career, or conversely, maybe when you helped make a difference in someone else's career through your network. And I see you, Sahil, on my top left, so maybe we can start with you and then go around.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. First and foremost, thanks to Orgs in Solidarity for hosting all of us. And I know it's being recorded, so I hope that many can benefit from the session, whether they're here or watching it afterwards. And yeah, I probably have two quick examples I can give. The first is really related to my role at the ELN. We're the European Leadership Network. It's a network of 300 Europeans from across the continent. It's intergenerational, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned from working for an organization that is not really a think tank, but this kind of group of people. And one of the ones is that networks, the best networks are bound by a common goal or objective or a common interest. And networks can obviously also be audiences. So in 2018, I started to write a daily Iran brief for contacts in the NGO space working on nuclear issues. It was like a daily brief. And at the time, nobody was really doing anything like that. And the issue was deteriorating so quickly that people really needed reliable information. And the one day that I did not send an Iran brief out to my list that was growing and growing and growing, and it just was a BCC'd email, is the day that the ELN's director called me and asked if I would come and run their Iran portfolio and turn those briefs into an ELN product. So I guess the lesson learned from that is that you should learn what value you can bring to different communities and groups as an entry point, and that will transform into more and more opportunities. And just other example very quickly is, there's ways for young people to really add value in governmental and intergovernmental, organizations. At the CTBTO in 2015, I started the CTBTO youth group, which has sort of spiraled into this very big entity. But at the time, it was very obvious that the organization could benefit from having a network of young people that would help raise the profile of the treaty. And again, rallying behind a common objective or theme was important in getting that off the ground.
Great, thank you. Simone, do you want to share something with us next?
Sure. When I think about networking, I try to, like when I'm conversing with my friends and others, try to dispel the myth that because we all think it's like transactional by nature. And sometimes there are those one-off interactions that you have with individuals, but more often than not, building a network is building a support system around you. So I think it's all about building genuine relationships. And that can range from if you're a student, whether it's undergrad or master's, and particularly undergrad specifically, building a relationship with a professor who could potentially help by writing letters of recs for you for your future career academic ambitions, or building networks with even your friends in programs that you work at, whether it's in school or programs that you do at work. I think those peer-to-peer relationships are just as important as looking for the senior relationship. And the senior relationships are helpful too, because they can help provide insight and guidance on what you see for your future. But for me, what stands out most in terms of thinking through networking and how it's helped me is when I moved to DC for both grad school and work. I didn't know anybody here, didn't even know the national security space, literally knew nothing, so much to the point that I thought a job at the National Security Agency, NSA, would have been a perfect fit for me because it says national security in the title. When I ended up meeting people who worked there and having interactions with people who've had connections there, that's where I then found out that wasn't what I was interested in. But it was through building networks and meeting with people and chatting with people that helped me identify that wasn't something that I was interested in. So although it was closing one door, it was helping me identify where I could retarget my areas of interest. So yes, some of those relationships were probably like they were short term. Like I still don't speak to, like when I reached out to somebody who worked at NSA, I'm not still talking with them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have long term relationships with people and things like that. So at the end of the day, I think it's just about being genuine when you interact with individuals, getting to know them and sharing a little bit about yourself. And if you're genuine, it will all work out, whether it's short term or long term.
Yeah, I love that. I tell people the same thing. You know, I think it's good to approach it just as making friends. You know, it's very clear when people are being transactional when they're engaging with you, you know, and it can be off-putting. And as important as networking is, you know, it's a personal experience at the end of the day, right? So it's a social experience. I think that hopefully makes it a little bit less intimidating for people. So let's go to Tristan and then Sue.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for having me as well. I think, everyone's covered a lot of really important points so far, and I just will add to what Simone was saying about learning what you're actually interested in. That's, to me, is one of my favorite parts of networking, is learning about jobs that I didn't know existed or didn't realize could actually be a career path. And as as part of managing our Future First Fellowship program, my favorite thing is being able to talk to young people and be like, look, I know you think you want to be a lawyer. For some reason, everybody wants to be a lawyer, but I know you think you want to be a lawyer, but actually, you love doing all of these things. Have you considered this? And that's one of my favorite parts of that program. And I think one of the really valuable things that can come from networking is just learning about new opportunities that you might not have imagined before.
Absolutely. I know when I was an undergrad, I thought, oh, I want to work in foreign policy. I need to be a foreign service officer. And then learning kind of what that actually was and how the process worked, it's like, oh, maybe this isn't really what I want, but the space can be so opaque, you don't really know these things without meeting people. Okay, let's go to Sue, if you could share with us your experience.
So I feel really old. So very frankly speaking, networking didn't come until very later for me, right? So coming out of graduate school with a PhD, I was actually recruited to CIA, so I didn't have to network. But what Simone said about building relationships is very, very important, because even for mid-career or late in career, because since then, every other job I had, including at the National Security Council, at the National Intelligence Council, at the CSIS, Wilson, every single other job came through basically relationships, and having built that relationship. So when Victor Chai and Catherine Katz were leaving NSC, there was a position open, or even CSIS, it was Michael Green and Victor Chai, because they reached out, and even at the Wilson Center, Denmark was now VP here. So this is sort of how it works. So even later in the career, I just want to remind everybody how important it is once you begin, because it's more frequent than not that a lot of these opportunities will come about because you built relationships with people. Now, since leaving the government, the one time that I did network, and that also led me a job. So there was, after I left the government, in 2011, I was in New York, and my last thing was at Council on Foreign Relations I did a year of fellowship. And then I met a senior professor at Columbia, networking. Sort of, it was a sort of social event where I ended up being, networking and sort of explaining my background and what I've been doing, and when I want to get into academia. And practically a position was built around my experience, right? So that would not have come about if I didn't sort of initiated that network. So that, personally speaking, that's, my Columbia, I was a senior research scholar there for 4 years. And that directly was a result of my networking and explaining to someone who was in a position to sort of create a position for me. And and that was great. And now, of course, I'm on the other side where I deal with many, many students. I taught at Columbia for 4 years. I teach at Georgetown. I now teach at Tufts University. I taught a semester at University of Chicago. I teach at Summer National University for 4 years. 5 years. So I have a ton of students. So I'm on the other side of the experience where they're networking with me. So it's really interesting to sort of see, you know, when I ended up helping, when I not quite ended up helping, whatever, but it's usually when they are also building relationship with me, it's like hard to say even no. I mean, look, I'm here today. I'm pretty busy this week because Katie and I have a relationship now. And she's like, can you do me this favor? And this is how it kind of works, right? I'm like, well, I have a lot of things, but I do want to carve out this time. And I think that is also a result of our relationship and our, so this is all to say at, you know, at different points in life. And now I'm at a point where I'm sort of the ones who's helping people out. Let's say the students are networking with me. And I'm the one who's providing all these things. Like if the students say, I think I want to go to law school or graduate school, do a PhD program or government job, I'm in a position to be sort of like, well, do you know what that is? Do you know what think tank people actually do at a think tank or in academia or in a government or a State Department or so on? So, and I think the way I can help is that, you know, I'm able to, so for example, if somebody wanted to apply to CIA and go into intelligence community, all I can do, but this is already a big step, is once your application is online, I'm able to use my contact to say, hey, somebody's application is online. Could you take a look? I'm not saying go hire that person. Now that person, it's up to them to go through the interview process and prove themselves, but I can at least sort of, you know, flag something for someone, right? In a think tank or so, but anyway, so that's sort of my experience, you know, and so I think it's so also helpful for me to say this to everybody in the Q&A session, if anybody wants to ask a follow-up question on that.
Yeah, thank you. And I am so grateful that you were able to do this today. And I really wanted to on this panel because I know in my personal experience, she's been so helpful to me in my career. So I know her to be someone who is really generous with, you know, giving opportunities to young professionals. And a lot of that comes up, like you said, naturally just through meeting them and wanting to help. So next, I guess we want to talk about kind of the do's and don'ts of networking, and that's a little hard to pin down, of course. But I think, you know, it can be, I think, especially for people who are maybe introverted, or if you're young and you feel like everyone around you is more experienced, you know, you can kind of experience imposter syndrome. I know that I did first starting out and still do sometimes. And these things can kind of make, you know, interacting and networking a little scary. So we want to talk about kind of what you can do to approach this in a way that's, you know, you make a good impression, you get some results, but also in a way that's comfortable and healthy for you personally. So why don't we all mix up a little bit? Let's go to Simone.
Sure. So like I said, I do think networking is across the seniority level. So if you're thinking about like your peer group, I think there is just being able to reciprocate it and not to ask too much, or and if somebody comes out to you to help offer. So when I think about my peer group, like for me, writing is a hard thing. So I use them as my safety network. To be able to be like, hey, I wrote something, can you give me your opinions and thoughts? Which is a good way for me to at least get the initial feedback before I then start moving that forward. But the same way as if a friend came back to me and asked me, I met this person, would you mind talking to them? I think you'd be really great. Then I'm going to respond and say yes. So that's like some things that I think about at the peer-to-peer level, because I genuinely think the peer-to-peer level is what's going to be most helpful to you as well, because you're growing together. And if your peers are in a wide range of sectors or jobs, it helps expand your knowledge set and things like that. And at the end of the day, they're also your friends. So being helpful there. And that's also like the key thing, right? Like we are just all humans at the end of the day. It's like the same things we all learned in kindergarten, like being nice, do unto others as you would do unto them. I think those are just the same lessons that transfer. A couple of things I'll say when you're doing interacting with somebody more senior, be respectful of their time. And what that means is if they do say I'm available to meet, then offer sometimes. It's good to set the initiative. Because then that way you can quickly get on their calendar rather than waiting for them to respond. But then also using that time efficiently, coming with questions that you may have at top of mind, and being well prepared and things like that. So those are just a couple things. I know there's a lot, and I'm sure the rest of the panelists will also have some great things to say. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, that's great advice. Why don't we go Sahil, Tristan, and Sue?
That was such a comprehensive answer. So I'll fully align myself with what was just said. And I would just add that, you know, it's important before you attend events or, you know, you go to different cities or places to, you know, spend some time thinking about who is going to be there or who is based in certain places that you may want to meet or speak with. You know, you may not be able to reach everyone, but you should think in your head, you know, who would be of most interest to get to know for whatever reasons. On a different level, you know, for when we have, say, the executive secretary of the CTBTO or someone very senior attend a conference, usually, you know, there's a list of touch points that you would like that person to make. And if you even get through, you know, say 30, 40% of that prioritized list of people, that's great. So I think people can replicate that in their professional life as well, no matter how senior you are, and just have a mental idea of who you'd like to meet and how you can reach out. And I totally agree with being mindful of people's time. And another big one, obviously, is to follow up. So if you offer to send something or reach out, you know, it's just good, even if it's a very short message, that people have your name and email in their inbox, because business cards are a thing of the past. The easiest thing is for somebody to just search your name and they'll immediately be able to pull up your contact information in their email history. So I think it's always worthwhile doing that. It's very difficult because when you come back, especially from traveling, which I know we haven't been doing a lot of during COVID, and you just want to get back to normal life and, you know, leave the conference or the event or wherever you were behind. But I think it's important to spend that, you know, little bit of time doing the follow-up work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. So we'll go to Tristan.
Yeah, for sure. Plus one to everything that's already been said. The only things that I feel like I can add is, you know, it is absolutely okay to utilize your current network and your mentors and your friends to make connections for informational interviews with other people, like folks that you're really interested in hearing about what it is that they do in their job or how they got to where they're at. With the caveat that just to be mindful that if your friend or your mentor or whoever does introduce you to someone else for an informational interview, you're also leaving a bit of an impression about that mentor or the person who introduced you, and just to be mindful of that. And I think, you know, Simone's already kind of covered this as well, but please don't come to informational interviews looking for a job. They're a really good place to learn more about what that job is. And I'll admit, I didn't know what an informational interview was until a couple of years ago. They're not something that I feel like is taught as a skill in a lot of places. But they're a super useful tool to learn about what working for an organization or in a certain space can be like. And I also think it provides you a really good opportunity for the follow-up that we were talking about too. Even if it is months later, you know, definitely send the thank you right away, but months later, if you get a job in the space and you want to say thank you, like I love getting emails like that where someone's just like, hey, we talked about this a year and a half ago, and now I wrote an article about it, so I wanted to share it. Like, I love hearing those things, and it also keeps your name in these people's minds so that you can continue that relationship.
Absolutely. Sue?
Yeah, so first, you know, Sahil says something about like, you know, doing some homework before you go to conference, whatnot, and saying, you know, kind of narrow down the people you want to talk to, do some research. I think this is really good advice, particularly, Katie, you mentioned, you know, what about people who are introverted, who's like overwhelmed? I mean, instead of trying to go and you're overwhelmed, like there's all these people and whom, it kind of helps, particularly for those people, to sort of think it through. Spend some time researching, seeing if, so it's more like achievable goals, and narrow people down. So it's easier, like I'm going to talk to 2 people today or 3 or 4, but these people are important, and do some homework. And I think so it's sort of have a quality, it's like targeting with, rather just randomly walking around trying to see who you can talk to. So I think I like that advice a lot. And then so that leads to my point about doing some homework. That's really helpful. Like this Monday, I was at Tufts University, and I met with 2 students. One was at Tufts undergrad, one was a Fletcher student. And both of them did enormous amount of homework before meeting with me. Like they randomly emailed, said, yeah, I know you're teaching at Tufts this semester. Would love to meet with you via Zoom or in person. I said, I happen to be on campus today. So I had these 2 meetings, and both of them, they were very good about, why they need to talk to me in particular. Just not random because but it's like, so one kid was like hugely into unification issues. You wrote XYZ. Ever since I followed you here, your speech there was really amazing. Whatever, like they had an angle. And then the other students similarly, but in a different way. You work in the intelligence community, and this is where I need you can help. So it made me feel like I particularly am good, in a good position to help versus like I'm one of many people you just happen to just reach out to. So having done that homework was hugely important because I am now willing to help both of them. They made really good impression instead of sort of saying, okay, forget about it, because I meet a lot of students. So I think doing that homework is really important. And then what Simone said about respecting one's time. So I am somebody who is very genuinely willing to help young people and whatnot. I really, it's like sort of my way of giving back, and I really love that. But there are people who just doesn't get that fine line. So I would say, like after a Zoom call or meeting, I'll say, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to follow up, and I really genuinely mean it. But then I had a student or 2 who literally wanted to set up like hourly, weekly meeting just to chat about life, and I'm like, wow, man, do you understand? I run around in a 15-minute increments. Like I didn't mean like weekly calls with you, like some sort of a shrink, so that's somebody who just that like, yes, sort of, so you got to sort of know how to, I think, manage that. So being somewhat respectable of one's time. So then I'm like, oh, I can't really engage with this person because when I'm trying to help, because I don't have this amount of time, so in that case, kind of backfires. Since Katie, one of your questions was, what's one of the don'ts? I gave you both examples of the do's, doing the homework, very successful. They will follow up and I'll help. The don't is someone who scared me off that, oh my God, this person, I can't get in there. Like I can become some sort of a shrink for him. And then I do say that lastly, another don't in terms of networking is in line of that, like it's you reach out. We already went through the whole thing. I looked at the approach that it's like wanting a job in a specific place. And I looked at your application, everything, but at this point, I just don't have it. Then it's still important to maintain that relationship because at some other point, I might have a different job or my colleague, someone else might have another position that I might recommend this person to. But one of the don'ts in one case is they just went all in and using everybody else who knew this person, ended up sending me like 20 emails saying, you must get this person on board. Like, so this person used up all that person's capital. And then now I was like, wow, it's very, very pushy. I already made a decision. So it's that kind of like, and so in that case, it didn't quite work either. And not only did it not work for this particular position, but it's not going to work for other positions too, because it was just too much. So it's that kind of knowing, I think networking, building relationship is kind of, it's an art. And the more you do it, you learn how to do it better. But there are some things that one needs to be careful of too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of that, I mean, at the end of the day, people want to work with people that they like. It's very important that you get along with your colleagues, that you get along with people in your network. So, if you're not respectful of someone's time, that also, or, you're just kind of not understanding kind of the nuances of these relationships, that also gets to other people in your network, and it can have follow-on effects. I just want to add one thing also from my personal experience that would be a don't. I think I would say don't pretend to know something if you don't. I know sometimes there are conversations when I'm talking to students or something, and I say, oh, you know, what's going on with this and this event, and it's clear they want to sound like they do know, but maybe they don't, and it's okay to say, no, I don't know, can you tell me, you know, and to be interested, and to just be genuine about that, you know. So we want to, oh, sorry.
Can I just follow up on quickly? I think because you made such an important point, particularly senior people, they live their life, they had their career. They can sense it when you're just being candid. It's something. Like, I 100% agree with that point. I really like, I think that's very, very, very important point. And then it's the likability thing you said. At the end of the day, people want to work with people they like, right? So that's really important, because it's, again, you might not get the job right then and there, but there are other opportunities, and your relationship with that person has not ended. It could go on next 30 years, and you never know when you're going to cross paths again. So it's really important just to keep that in mind.
Definitely. So I do want to save time for Q&A, but I want to spend maybe the next 7 minutes, if we can get to Q&A at 1:40 maybe, but I want to talk about something really important. Obviously, Orgs in Solidarity, the mission is to, you know, we're focused on diversity and inclusion in this field, and the reality is that a lot of spaces in security in particular, sometimes peace building, et cetera, can be very white and very male dominated. So I want to get some perspective from all of you on how you can navigate networking in that space as a person of color, or just anyone really that doesn't fit that description. So maybe we can start with Sahil, and then Tristan, Sue, and Simone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest shift that I've seen now over the past few years, and in part thanks to the great work that Orgs in Solidarity and WCAPS and many others have done, is that there's at least an acknowledgement that there is a need to diversify, you know, geography, race, generationally, along all these different axes, you know, who is not just who's speaking, but who's actually heard. And I think in the present day and age, people should take up space and speak up and take up opportunities without hesitation, and weave in personal histories and experiences and perspectives in how they approach what are very complex topics that we all work on. And I would say to fellow young people, you know, to really try to not let institutions or rigid ideas of who should embody them or occupy them kill your agency or imagination. You know, this is always important. Organizations and institutions are always meant to transform and evolve with the times, and that requires people to push for change. So whether that's in the workplace, whether that's within your communities or within networks, or, you know, wherever it is, I think it's important to push, but also to acknowledge that anything that costs you your peace is too expensive. So, you know, you need a break, take breaks, rest, find ways to remove yourself and refresh yourself, because everything, including all the problems we work on, will more than likely still be there when you come back.
I really like that phrase, anything that costs you your peace is too expensive, and that's all really great advice. So let's go to Tristan.
Yeah, I love that phrase as well. So I guess, and I want to preface this by saying that I have primarily networked in the progressive nonprofit space. So this is not the NSA, Pentagon, academia. It is admittedly a little bit easier. But I think, you know, the most important thing is to remind yourself that you do belong in the room, you are worthy of these people's time. Like, you're asking for 15 to 20 minutes most of the time, or even less than that sometimes. And just getting past that imposter syndrome and really recognizing that maybe not everyone is excited that you're there, but you'll find people who are excited that you're there. And the number of those people in the space is growing slowly but surely. And then I guess the other thing I would say is, along that same line, you will be surprised how many people want to help you in a lot of these spaces. The first time I wrote an article with William Hartung, it was because I emailed him and I was like, "Dear Mr. Hartung, I respect you so much. I love all of your work. You're such a great writer. Would you consider perhaps writing this with me?" And it was a really great experience. He pushed to have my name published first on the billing. And that was something that was like a real turning point to me. I'd been in the community for about a year, and I was just like, oh, there are really cool people in these spaces who are really interested in doing the work that they say that they're interested in doing and getting more diverse voices and younger voices into this space. Sometimes you just have to ask, and the asking is the really scary part, but the worst people can say is no.
Yeah, absolutely. The worst someone can say is no, and then you move on. It's no big deal. So, okay, let's move to Sue.
So I really like everything you guys have said. I cannot agree more. Worst thing people can say is no, not a big deal. Seriously, move on. And the imposter syndrome, everybody has it. I have it. Everybody has it. There's not a person. If you don't, something's kind of wrong with you because you think that's so you're supposed to have it. So know that. Somebody also said, so don't be intimidated. You do belong in that room. I think Tristan, you said that. It's hard to say don't be intimidated because I was intimidated too. When I first joined the CIA, I was in my 20s. And then, like in a morning meeting, all these guys will sit. It's true, a lot of white guys who would sit, and we're sitting in the back row. And then oftentimes in the beginning when people did not know me at all, and it would go big delegation would go out to Korea from CIA or whatever, there's a lot of white male type, right? I'm also women and Korean, and even Koreans didn't know what to do with me. They're like, initially, they're like, are you a translator? Is there, interpreter sits over here, or, and I'm like, no, I'm part of the delegation. Thank you very much. But it's just knowing that you do belong there and trying to take maybe few practical things. Like if you're also someone who is introverted and who gets intimidated, maybe you can tell yourself a couple things. Like every time I go into a meeting, I will sit in that third seat or second seat. Like tell yourself, it's just something that you're gonna do. You can't sit next to the principal. It's okay. Like this is not some hierarchy. Like you're not supposed to just sit in the second row. So make yourself do it. Like, so it might be like a little habit that you do. Like once you say, I'm afraid to ask a question or speak up at a round table and let all these people else speak, even though you know stuff, okay? Tell yourself, I'm gonna be the second person to speak, no matter what. When there are people done speaking, if you're too afraid to go first, I'll be the third person. So make a little rule for yourself until it becomes a habit. And then you're like, you own it, you do it. Like, because it's really hard if you have not done it. But it's really important for everybody to remember, like, don't get intimidated. Know that you belong there, and just go for it again. And what's the worst that can come? Nothing. Seriously, like what's your worst fear? But anyway, this is my way of saying I agree with all the points that are made. I think these are really excellent points.
Absolutely, and also doing those things can really build your confidence and lessen your imposter syndrome, right? I think it would be hard for people who know me now to believe this, but I, like in college, was so painfully shy that if I would ask a question in class, like my entire body would turn red. But I think actually networking and getting to know people in the space and realizing, oh, people do think I have something to contribute, people are listening when I talk, that really helped build my confidence. Okay, Simone, if you can give us your perspective on this last question, then I see we have one question in the Q&A, but please put more there if you have anything, and we'll answer all of those.
Sure. Thank you so much for this question and incorporating it, Katie. I think is really worth addressing. And I think my fellow panelists have answered it amazingly. I actually want to take one quick moment to give another response to your last question on do's and don'ts of networking and acknowledge the space we're living in, this Zoom world, and how much harder it is to meet people because we're not always having in-person interactions. So one thing I'll add there is, if you're in a Zoom space where the chat is actually active, if there's somebody who said something that you thought was really interesting, send them a quick note saying, I'd love to talk with you more. Here's my email, or can I have yours? And I can follow up separately. Do the follow-up separate, not during the meeting, because that's interrupting people. Or ask the person who's hosting the event if they could connect you. So I just want to throw that out there as something tangible you can do in the space we're currently living in. To your actual question that you've asked about how do we address being there, I mean, yes, the national security space, especially the peace and security field, is predominantly male and white. And I think, as to the point of networking, I think that just means you have to, one, acknowledge and accept it, and know that you can't discount those individuals as mentors, because they could be just as amazing as somebody who looks like you. But also, there's nothing wrong with looking for mentors who look like you as well. But just recognizing that you shouldn't limit yourself based on certain factors, because at the end of the day, you're going to learn so much more by having a vibrantly diverse network. And that's going to come from individuals who have different perspectives, different political leanings, different backgrounds and experiences and things like that. So that's my 2 cents on that question, because I think the rest of the panel has answered it brilliantly.
Amazing. That's definitely great advice to close that question out on. And I see we have 2 questions in the Q&A. So hopefully we can get to both of these. We can maybe be a little brief in our responses. First one is, do you have recommendations for how to maintain a network established professionally if and when you move on to graduate school and are not actively engaging with work in the field day to day? Does anybody want to add anything on that?
So I have a quick thing that comes to mind. I'm not sure if it answers the question in full, but one thing in terms of like maintaining your networks with professors, I think it's like I said at the top of the discussion, that it's just building a genuine relationship. So if you have like one professor in mind that you know at a later date, you may want to come back to them for a letter of recommendation, just maintain that relationship. It was something I did. I knew I was interested in pursuing a higher degree after I finished my bachelor's, but I wasn't ready to do it directly after school. So I had one professor who I would regularly send emails, or when I was back in the area of where my school was, I'm like, hey, I'm back on campus. Would you be available for coffee to catch up and things like that? So it's really just those little things of keeping people connected or things like that.
Just to follow up on that really quickly, I have maintained relationships with like everybody. Like I graduated from graduate school 25 years ago. I got my PhD. I maintained contacts with my professors, at least several, my dissertation advisors. Once I left the CIA and the NIC, I still maintain contacts. So this is it. You can do that without being in the space. Like when I'm like, hey, I'm in Chicago, you're now in Chicago, I'm visiting. Should we grab dinner? Should we grab a drink? There's no problem. Like, somebody said like there's a lot of cool people out in the world. There are. Not many people are going to say, actually, no, I can't have that coffee with you. And in fact, if there are those people, you don't actually need, you don't need them necessarily. So there's no reason for you to not reach out because you're visiting a city or just randomly, texting or saying, hey, I'm sending you an article, which I'm like, I thought of you because I saw this. Or like, it's a relationship, right? Or I looked at this, I could be like, it could be a movie. I saw a movie, you're gonna love this. I read a book, you must read it. Like you can do that. That's not causing anything. That's not costing anything. You just continue the momentum, continue the relationships with people that are important to you.
If I could just quickly add, if you are going into grad school, I assume it's probably to study the issues that you've worked on professionally before further. So, just because you're not engaging with work in the field day to day doesn't mean that you can't carve out time to write an op-ed or even post article on LinkedIn with a short message of what your analysis of it is, or be active on Twitter or social media. That's another very quick way of engaging with your colleagues and friends and network in a way that is day to day because it's following current developments, but you're not having to be based at an institution or maybe, you know, networking in the same way. So I think social media has definitely opened up a huge opportunity to stay visible and stay in touch. So I would say that that's a good tool.
Yeah, I was definitely also going to mention Twitter. I think it's a really great way to, especially if you are introverted and if someone like me or Sahil, where you're not based in kind of the DC blob or one of the major cities, it's a really good way to interact with other people in the space and have conversations. And, you know, I think it's okay to just message people sometimes and be like, hey, I read your article about this thing. It was really great. I just wanted to tell you that. That's a great piece of mail to get that day. And the other thing that I wanted to say is that we're all busy people. And I think sometimes we will stop ourselves from sending an email to reach out to someone or something like that because we feel like it needs to be 3 paragraphs long and include like lots of thoughts on recent things. And it doesn't. It can be 2 sentences like, hey, I read this article. It reminded me of our conversation. I was thinking about you the other day. I hope you're doing well. And that's still like getting, you know, maintaining that relationship in a genuine way. But you don't have to, you know, perfection is the enemy of progress here. And feeling like you have to have these long conversations or do a lot to maintain relationships actually will sometimes stop you from maintaining those relationships in the first place.
Absolutely. And I also want to add, you know, specifically about grad school, you know, there are people that can help you and that you can network with everywhere. Actually, one of the biggest reasons that students and young professionals reach out to me for advice is because I went to grad school in Korea. And the common thing I hear is, well, I'm really worried about not going to grad school in DC. Like, will I miss out on opportunities and meeting the people there? And I always tell them, actually, the absolute best thing that I did for my career and for my network was to go to grad school abroad, because, you know, there are automatically in the expat community there, all the Americans I met who were much, much higher level, obviously, in their careers than I was as a student, we all have something in common, which is the experience of being a foreigner living in South Korea. And so it was so much easier to approach people in that context. And I ended up, I met someone on my first week in Seoul at a diplomatic happy hour who worked with US Forces Korea. And I basically told them what I did and what I was interested in. They said, oh, do you want an internship? Like, it just happens like that sometimes. So, you know, just because you are not in DC and in these spaces where networking in person is kind of more organic doesn't mean there won't be opportunities. So our second question, this is a long one, says, okay, I've had networking and mentoring discussions where the individual ends up giving advice that makes it clear they think I'm much more junior than I actually am, and therefore their advice ends up being not so helpful. What tips do you have for conveying your experience so that the person you are networking with understands your background and so you can get the most out of interactions? I've gotten into the habit of seeing my resume before mentoring and networking discussions. Oh, sorry, sending my resume, which seems to help for those times where sending a resume in advance is not feasible. What advice would you give? Yeah, that's a really good question. I know I still get asked if I'm an intern sometimes. Does anyone have anything to add on that?
You know, I think you're doing a really good job by sending your resume in advance when possible. The only advice I can think of offering here, and I'm really excited to hear what other folks have to say, is perhaps sending your questions too. So it's clear that your questions are based off the fact that you know a little bit about what you're talking about and you want to dive deeper into the topic than kind of maybe that surface level that they're giving you.
I think there's also, if you are not able to give your resume, you can have your 3-minute, 2-minute intro ready. So when you have that initial conversation, you can sort of say, you know, let me quickly introduce myself and give you a little bit of a background so you have context, right? You understand who. So you can do this in quite nicely. And so you put together that little intro speech. And in fact, it's a good thing to write and memorize, because at any point you might run into somebody somewhere and you're having this little cocktail space. It's good to sort of have that down, right? So just by hearing that, you're like, oh, okay, I'm not talking to an intern. I'm talking to somebody who actually had experience here and there. And that's not, it doesn't have to even have to be long. It can be very brief. So don't let the person hijack, is what I'm trying to say. Before the person hijacks the conversation, have that intro ready and way to sort of introduce yourself with confidence.
And also you can have somebody senior, if you already have a mentor or a boss or somebody who knows you and your qualifications and skills well, then sometimes it's better if that person introduces you more laterally to that other senior person and makes the introduction, because that person will say, well, if this person thinks so highly of them, or if this person believes in their skills and whatnot, then they'll take the introduction more seriously rather than say some kind of a cold call, if you're reaching out on your own. So yeah, I would say don't be afraid to ask that of mentors or bosses or other senior folks, because it's a very easy ask. Out of all the things that they could do, writing a very short email and just connecting you to someone is very easy. So
I have to second what Sahil just said. This is 100% right on. I do that all the time. People ask me to do that. Do you know so-and-so? Do you mind introducing me? This is like no brainer. As busy as I am, that takes like 3 sentences. And then I'll have to tell you with 100% certainty, I respond if someone made the introduction that I respect or I care about is also like my colleague or somebody who's even more senior. Like I'm like, oh, because so it automatically gives credibility to whoever is writing, right? Also, even in response, right? Instead of a sort of a student who doesn't know, like, oh, I'm going to respond, and then a week goes by and your company might forget about it. But this is actually a very important point. Everybody should do this, actually.
I'll end it with Dr. Terry's earlier point about having your bio, extremely helpful. I also think it's not like, in order for knowing it, it's also knowing like the space and time you have. Like sometimes you have 10 minutes to where you could fully talk about everything. Sometimes you have only 30 seconds to talk about yourself. So just know your story and be aware of like the time that you have for telling that story. Also to the question, I think one of the things is just nicely also pointing out, like, hi, I think you may have misinterpreted where I am in my career, and then actually tell them. There's nothing wrong with being direct. Just do it nicely and cordially. And then my last piece of advice that I think applies for all things in networking is just taking everything with a grain of salt. Nothing anybody tells you is what you need to take and do for it. What it is you're gathering the information that's going to work best for you. So I think that's just the best piece of advice that I've given myself in terms of going with networking.
Definitely. Oh, sorry, Sue, did you have something else?
No, it's just funny because what Simone said about having, as an intelligence analyst, we had to have a briefing for, like, you prepare for like 20 minutes, 50 minutes, 30 minutes, and a 3-minute elevator briefing, because you don't know what's going to happen. Like you might go in there for a full briefing and then you just have an elevator ride. That's why it's literally called elevator briefing, right? So it's actually what she was saying about having sort of different versions and ready to go. That's actually good practical advice.
Yes. So unless Tristan has anything to add, maybe we can, let's just, everyone, we can go around the room, and if you have any closing thoughts, anything you think we didn't cover that you want to touch on, and then we can close everything out for today. Sahil, do you want to start us off with?
Sure, yeah, I would just say, like, networking shouldn't be something that is stressful. It should be just very organic. So do what you can, build a network at your own speed, maintain it at your own speed. You don't need to be so worried about being a serial networker and posting every day and emailing everybody every day. Be purposeful and just like how you maintain your personal relationships in your personal life, reach out with intention and follow through and be present. And it's no different with professional networks. So that would be my last little note.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe we can go Simone, Tristan, and Sue in that order.
Um, I'll take it to what I said at the top. I think networking really is just being your authentic, genuine self. And if you follow that, you'll be able to do well. Additionally, the last thing that I'll add that hasn't already been said, because I don't want to take up too much time or space, is just like by being a good person, you're not going to burn any bridges. And burning bridges is actually the worst thing that you can do when trying to build networks, because you don't know who knows other people. And you also don't know if you're ever going to interact with that individual at another time. So just be a nice person and don't burn bridges.
Definitely. Tristan?
Yeah, I think something that I think about when I hate the term networking, and I think networking gives us this, like, it's a little old school. It makes us feel like it's a transactional thing. It makes us feel like it's something that we absolutely have to do. And I've started kind of shifting it to thinking about coalition building with colleagues that, like, to Simone's point, we're going to be in the space with for a long time, hopefully. So when you kind of, if you shift your thinking to, it's more of like building your community or your coalition of like-minded peers, it might take away some of that anxiety. And I think really gets to my purpose in networking a little bit better than building a Rolodex of people that I can call on someday.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's so true. The people that you meet now, even the people you meet when you're a student, are going to be in the space with you for a long time. And I know Sue and I at every event probably see the exact same people every time. A few new faces rotating in, but you know, you're going to see these people often. All right, Sue, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything new to add. I think it's, just think of it as very, you are meeting people in your community, in your area that you're passionate about, potentially some cool people while you're learning things on the way. Should not be stressful. Build a relationship and know, like, and I would, like Simone's point about not sort of, it's the burning the bridge or whatever the phrase is. Also, actually, the world in that community is kind of small, right, Katie? Like, our community is, you think it's kind of big, but it's not. Like, everybody knows everybody. Even before I tried to work with Katie on something, I talked to 3 other people on Katie. Like, so everybody knows. So I think it's really, that's also good advice. Like, you don't want to blow up a relationship, you know, be mindful of that, because we're all connected. So just do your thing. Sahil said, let it go organically. Don't stress. Go out there, meet some cool people, and you know, keep that relationship up. You know, like, and have confidence in yourself. It's, you know, it's hard, but you know, you belong here. So have confidence, and good luck to everybody.
That's great advice to close us out on. And thank you everyone so much for being here. I know you all are extremely busy and really appreciate you taking the time. This was wonderful advice, and it's really good to meet those of you that I haven't met before, and good to see Simone and Sue again. I'm sure we'll all be in touch. So thank you so much. We'll end there. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.